Webcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the FY21 CDBG Applicants Workshop. This morning, we started off with giving an overview of CDBG, as well as local government requirements, procurement, citizens participation, and environmental review requirements. This afternoon, you'll hear from an array of our staff, beginning with John West and Julie Yoder, who are planners in our Office of Research and Planning. And they will kick off this afternoon with the local comprehensive plan and the service delivery strategy presentation. I'll turn it over to you now, John.
Excellent. Thanks, Kim. Hi, everyone. My name is John West. I've been working with the Georgia Department of Community Affairs for about 15 years at this point in the Office of Planning, and originally from Southwest Georgia, the southwesternmost county in the state. I did my undergraduate work in Northwest Georgia in Rome at Berry College, and I lived down on the coast for a while after that before finishing graduate work at the University of West Georgia, where I concentrated in rural and small town planning before coming to Atlanta to work for DCA after some private sector consulting work. At the moment, I am also the vice chair of my own local planning commission. So, you know, I've been around the state. I've seen how planning works in a variety of contexts, from the state level as well as the local level. And in my day-to-day work, I manage DCA's local, regional, and intergovernmental planning team. That includes Julie Yoder, who you'll hear from a little bit later. But basically, what I'm here to talk about today is something that some of you, if you attended the applicants workshop last year, or rather in 2019, you will recognize a lot of this presentation. We've been, at DCA, we've been talking a lot in recent years about the need to align our community planning documents with the projects and the actual activities and work that local governments are doing and seeking funding assistance with for several years now, especially in light of the reality that statute regarding planning and regarding the general work of DCA actually directs us to be thinking about that when the agency is making funding decisions. So let's talk a little bit about that. Let's see. And there we go. Taking just a moment to get the screen clicking through there. So we're going to talk a bit today about the agency's, DCA's work to ensure that local planning documents, local comprehensive plans in particular, and local service delivery strategies align with CDBG applications. I'll speak mostly to the comp plan side of that issue, and Julie will come in a few minutes and talk about how that works with service delivery strategies. So all of this is really being driven by what the statute in the Georgia Planning Act actually says. The Georgia Planning Act of 1989 directs DCA and our partner agencies to make grants and loans to what are called qualified local governments, as defined in the Act. One of the principal qualifications to be a qualified local government is to have a locally adopted, DCA-approved local comprehensive plan. And then the agency, when I say the agency, I'm only talking about DCA. DCA is directed to consider coordinated comprehensive planning when making grants and loans. The way we're doing that these days is in a CDBG application. This is considered as a project strategy question on Form DCA 5 in the application. So what are we really talking about? Well, what we're looking for in the CDBG application is something that relates directly to the local comprehensive plan. ideally, the project that seeks CDBG funds should fit into a coordinated approach that links together the disparate elements of the comprehensive plan. I'm sure most of the folks listening on the call have some familiarity with what's in a comprehensive plan. The state's requirements push local governments to have several different specific elements in a plan. There's a vision, there are goals, there are policies, those broad conceptual sorts of things that articulate what the community wants to be in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, in that long-term time horizon. It also articulates the more immediate needs and opportunities that the community has to address on a day-to-day basis, and those sort of brush fires that pop up that you have to be putting out just to be able to take care of the citizens, just to be able to do your day-to-day work. And all of that sort of fits together into specific work program items, among which should be the project that you are seeking funding for. So it's all well and good to talk about that conceptually, and it'll look, kind of cute on the screen as a clip art illustration, but what are we actually talking about? So when we think about the sorts of things that you see in a comprehensive plan and how that relates to a CDBG project, ideally there should be some linkage from the broader conceptual components of the plan down through into the more specific elements of the plan that feed out into a project. So let's take, for instance, a local vision statement in their comprehensive plan and start from there. This is just an example that I threw together. So this isn't necessarily reflective of any specific community, even though I think I took that picture. I think that picture is from the city of Noonan, but they're not all from Noonan. So what we're talking about here, and this is something you would typically see in a comprehensive plan, just cut right out of it. Part of this community's vision is that they will have a vibrant, thriving downtown that maximizes public and private investments that they have already made in their community in terms of infrastructure, public services, and community spaces. That feeds down a little further into a more specific statement of the community's goals. So you're going from the broad sort of conceptual vision of what you want to be 20 years down the road, and you're breaking that down into the specific goals of what that will look like. A goal that supports that vision would be something like businesses want to locate their enterprises and residents want to live and play near our downtown that will be the hub of our community. Getting even more specific, there would be a policy statement, ideally, that supports that goal. A policy statement, something like, we will ensure that necessary resources are prioritized to ensure speedy repair of faulty infrastructure and strategic replacement of aging infrastructure in the older areas of our city. So we're gradually becoming more and more specific. And keep in mind, this is an ideal scenario. Getting even more specific, the needs and opportunities that typically would come out of a community-driven, public input-oriented SWOT kind of process. Most folks are aware of what SWOT means. It's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And it's an analytical tool that basically pulls information from a group of people, and you can distill that out into a set of policies and objectives. In this situation, we call them needs and opportunities in the local comprehensive plan, and they are more reflective of the immediate, the immediate brush fires I was talking about that you kind of have to address in the short term, regardless of what your 5, 10, 20-year time horizon is looking for. But in this case, a need or opportunity that would also be reflective of this general vision, goal, policy thrust that this community is working towards would be that, would be a statement that the community has experienced repeated sewer leaks along Placeville Parkway, and they've had discharges of sewage into their river during the rainy periods, with 2 breached water mains on Broad Street in the past 5 years. So basically, this community is putting in its plan that it has a specific need. There's an issue going on with sewer leaks. So those two sort of sometimes competing, but hopefully not, imperatives, the long-term sort of conceptual vision section of your plan and those immediate brush fires and the needs and opportunities come together in the community work program, which is supposed to be basically a to-do list of the specific activities that the community intends to undertake within the next 5 years to address those brush fires while still incrementally moving the community towards its long-term vision. So what does that look like? We've gotten a lot of questions over the years about how these projects should be formulated in a work program in order to provide the kind of specificity that the CDBG reviewers are looking for without problematically boxing the community in to a hyper-specific project that may not, 3 years down the road, be reflective of the immediate needs that are on the ground at that time, but were unforeseen at the time the plan was originally formulated. So what I presented here is an example of a community work program project that addresses this vision, goal, and policy concept, as well as a need and opportunity that's been articulated by this sort of example community. This is, again, an idealized version, but the work program project would, it has a description there that says that the community wants to replace all of their leaking water and sewer lines in the historic Placeville character area, and 20% of the remaining aged lines in that area. Even the ones that aren't leaking, they want to proactively start replacing some of the old stuff before it begins to leak. So the benefit there in this description is that it articulates what the project is. They want to replace sewer lines. It provides a specific geography that you can determine by looking at the plan. You've got the historic Placeville character area, and it provides a specific metric that they're looking for as well that can be very useful. 20% of everything that isn't leaking in that area still needs to be replaced. It provides clear start and end dates that, it's a range of years, so it doesn't have to happen in one specific, moment in time. They've given themselves a little bit of wiggle room and some adaptability there. They provided a general cost estimate. They provided the funding sources where they think they might possibly be able to get money from. They put basically anything they could think of that could provide funding, they put it there in the comp plan's work program. And they identified the specific people who will be responsible for making sure that the project gets implemented. Now, I mentioned the importance of walking the line between providing specificity and avoiding being too vague. You don't want to box yourself in, but you still need to provide the specificity necessary to provide a link between the comp plan and the CDBG project that you're applying for funding for. So what am I talking about when I talk about something that's too vague? And this kind of a project, we're looking at the bottom section of the screen here, is wholly consistent with things that we see in community work programs and comp plans pretty frequently. It does not, however, provide the level of specificity that you'd be looking for in order to link the comp plan with a specific project. All this community has done is say something, the project is, I don't know, it's something about water and sewer lines. I don't know. Are they you looking for leaks? Are they replacing them? Are they installing, lift station? I mean, what are they actually doing here? I don't know. You can't tell. The start and end date they put in, it's the entire 5-year work program window. They have no cost estimate provided. The only funding sources they've identified specifically is the general fund. And then they just said, yeah, basically anywhere else too. The responsible party, they just said, the city's going to do it. That really is just too vague to provide the kind of linkage that you're looking for that would really be supportive and helpful for your CDBG application. At the same time, if you're helping a community formulate a work program project, you don't want to make it so specific that if conditions change, the project will no longer really be reflective of what you need. So in this case, you could put that you're going to replace the 6-inch water and sewer lines with 12-inch lines on Broad Street from 1st Avenue to 4th Avenue. And you're going to put 10-inch lines on Placeville Parkway from Riverside Park to Towns Boulevard. And you're going to do it in 2022, and it's going to cost $2.35 million. You didn't, in this case, identify when the comp plan was being written that the CDBG was even a potential funding opportunity there. So, what happens if this plan was produced, I don't know, in 2020, and you get to 2022, and all of a sudden you've realized you've got some major leaks happening on Main Street that you have to address. You would really like to get a CDBG for, but that work program and the comp plan, it only talked about Broad Street and Placeville Parkway and all of that kind of stuff. I mean, what this community has done by providing what they thought was some really good specificity is they boxed themselves out of being able to apply for a CDBG for this project. So again, ideally, we're looking for that project to provide enough specificity to link what you're looking for back to the plan without being too vague, without being too specific. There's a balance in there. And honestly, guys, we on the planning team, we're happy to talk to you guys if you're in a situation where you're trying to formulate a project to, if you're going to amend the comp plan to make sure that, the thing that you're applying for is in there, you can do that. But ideally, when the comp plan is being written at the outset, this stuff would already be plugged in there in a way that makes it usable and adaptable and flexible to the needs of the community as they grow and change over time. Again, it's all very idealized, but that's really what we're hoping for. At a minimum, this is not an ideal. This is at a minimum in order to provide a linkage that CDBG will be able to see, and it will be immediately apparent. This community has identified that we want to replace our water and sewer lines downtown, somewhere downtown. This is the project. This is where it's going to happen. It's going to happen sometime in the next 5 years. This is our general idea of a cost. We don't know what specific grants and loans we're going to apply for, but we do think if there are grants and loans out there, we want to explore them. Even if there isn't a whole lot of specificity or discussion about infrastructure or whatever kind of a project you're looking for, in the vision and the goals and the policies that would tie directly in the item for which you're seeking funding, that project still needs to be reflected specifically enough in the work program to make a clear and compelling connection between the plan and the CDBG application. So when I talk about the vision and the goals and policies and needs and opportunities, that's great. That will be really helpful and supportive of your application. But at a minimum, if you're just trying to establish some kind of a linkage, this will do. So how does this actually work within the context of the application timeline this year? So Many of you will know that the Office of Planning has deadlines that fall at 3 different points during the year. We call them our trimester deadlines. Most communities find themselves rushing to get things to us in order to meet their deadlines that happen to fall at the end of February, the end of June, and the end of October. The closer that things get submitted to those deadlines, the more likely it is that there are many other items ahead of you in line. But regardless of the time, the specific day that things get submitted, DCA is provided up to 30 days within which to complete our review. And, you know, if a comp plan submittal gets approved, the local government can go and immediately adopt it. And once DCA receives notice that that the plan has been adopted by resolution by the elected body of that local government, they are good to go. If, however, we send it back and there's something that needs to be revised, the local government will work on it and resubmit it for review again. All of that ends up being channeled by the regional commission, and it can take time. So we always recommend providing yourselves as much lead time as possible. And even if the local government isn't necessarily trying to meet one of our office's standard reporting deadlines, I would recommend submitting things as far in advance of the end of February, the end of June, and the end of October as possible, in order to avoid having to compete with the mad rush of submittals that often come in during those months. Now, in order for local governments to maintain qualified local government status that we talked about at the beginning of my chat, the local government must adopt its plan, a DCA approved plan, before a deadline passes. One thing to note is that regional and state review is not actually required under our standards for relatively minor amendments and updates. So if you find yourself in a situation where all you need to do is plug one new project into the community's work program, that's something that can be handled wholly at the local level. The local government would simply follow the same kind of process that they would, say, for instance, if they were handling a local rezoning, because at its root, the courts have determined that a comp plan is a tool for zoning, and you have to follow whatever rules the local government and the state has in place for making modifications to your local zoning ordinance. So that being said, it's really easy to modify the comp plans in advance of your CDBG application in order to build this linkage in there. All DCA really looks for, if, for instance, if you're just plugging a new project in there, is for the local government to provide a courtesy copy of the as amended plan. When I say the as amended plan, I don't mean like a resolution that then has an attachment with one project that says we have added this project to our plan. What we're actually looking for is the whole plan with the modification plugged into it. That is an amended plan, and the plan isn't actually amended until you have made the change to the document. So that being said, keep in mind the CDBG cycle here. The folks on the CDBG application review team will be checking to make sure that the applying local governments have qualified local government status on June 4th. QLG status is required by June 4th in order to qualify for CDBG funds. The team will then go back on July 1 and reconfirm that the communities that have applied for CDBGs still have QLG status. Any questions about any of that before we move forward and Julie talks with you for a little bit about SDSs? Okay, hearing nothing, Let's see. Julie, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you, John. Under question 1, and the government, authority, or organization that will be responsible for providing this service should be listed under whichever answer is selected. Please make sure that any government, authority, or organization listed as a service provider on a Form 2 is also listed on Form 1 in Box 2, where the authorized providers are listed. That is often forgotten. And if the other box is selected, which you see at the bottom of the screen, a map delineating the service area of each service provider is also required. This is an example of a good service area map. All of the map elements are included, a legend, a north arrow. The service areas are clearly labeled and the colors are easy to differentiate. And this is not an acceptable service area map. Moving on to Form 2, Box 3, this is where each government or authority is listed, along with the funding method they utilize to perform that specific service listed on Form 2. Funding sources could include grants, user fees, the general fund, or various taxes, for example. Form 4 is the signature page and must contain an authorized signature from the county seat, municipalities with 9,000 residents or more, and no less than 50% of the municipalities with between 500 and 9,000 residents. I know that's a lot, but it is listed on the Form 4 as well. Smaller municipalities and authorities are also encouraged to sign the form, but it is not required. Each signature must also include the jurisdiction being signed for, the title of the person signing, their printed name, and the date. A few things to keep in mind: forgetting to date the signatures is one of the most commonly requested revisions for an SDS. So please be sure each signature is dated. Also, the signatures must come from the actual chief elected official. So regarding deadlines and review times, just as John has previously mentioned, there are 3 trimester deadlines. Each community has a deadline on one of those dates, and they must meet that deadline to remain compliant with the Service Delivery Act. Once an SDS is submitted to DCA for review, we have 30 days to review the document. Once the SDS is reviewed and verified by DCA, the local government must adopt the SDS before the deadline to react. Again, just like the comp plans, June 4th, 2021 is the deadline for the Service Delivery Act compliance to be eligible for CDBG funds. However, the DCA CDBG office is allowing a 60-day cure period after June 4th for local governments to make any necessary changes to their SDS so that they may be in compliance. If your community is worried about getting an SDS update completed by the deadline, we encourage you to instead submit an SDS extension request so that your community does not fall out of compliance with the Service Delivery Act. An extension, however, can only be submitted if there are no changes to the existing SDS. Both service providers and services must remain the same. The only documents required for an extension request are a Form 1, which we previously discussed, and a Form 5, which is shown on the slide. The community can select their own deadline on this form up to 10 years from their current deadline. This is followed by a signature block, which is the same one as we discussed on Form 4. And that sums it all up. I'd be happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Julie, I don't see any questions that have come in at this point, but I would like to make this is John again. Just want to make one observation for the folks on the call about something that is a frequent source of confusion for folks, and that is the distinction between qualified local government status, QLG status, and SDS compliance. Those are 2 completely different, separate, unrelated concepts and qualifications. A local government can absolutely have QLG status, but still be non-compliant with the Service Delivery Act, or vice versa. Either one of those will result in a local government's inability to access CDBG funds. Qualified local government status is related to local comprehensive plans and a local government's annual reporting of immigration status compliance that Jackie Newbert will be on to discuss a little bit later today. But it's about local planning for the most part, and it affects a pool of DCA administered financial resources, as well as a couple of programs from GFA and the Department of Natural Resources. Service delivery strategy non-compliance, on the other hand, is a much bigger deal that affects local governments and authorities' ability to access funds and permits and licenses, whether it's grants or loans, anything from any state agency. Whether we're talking about funding from GDOT, whether we're talking about your local sheriff's office and their ability to renew permits to run laser and radar speed enforcement. SDS non-compliance is a much bigger problem for local governments than QLG loss, but both of them could result in would result in an inability to access CDBG funds. But just remember, when we're discussing them, they are two completely different concepts.
Thank you, John and Julie. I do see a couple of questions that I'd like to pitch to you guys. The first is, if you're looking to fund a Boys and Girls Club project or a similar project, how have you seen these incorporated within the SDS or the comprehensive plan?
You want me to take a stab at that, or you got it?
Sure, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Kim, that's a great question. That's one that has come up a couple of times in the past, in particular with Boys and Girls Clubs. Because if we're talking about Boys and Girls Clubs and the facility, like the actual building, we won't typically see the building and the facility in an SDS itself. The Boys and Girls Club and the relationship that it might have with the local government in providing a service, that will often be in an SDS. You might see that reflected in a service, and I'm just spitballing here, but you might see it reflected in a service called youth development or after school activities, or you know, that sort of thing. Or you could even see it listed as something under recreation. But the Boys and Girls Club facility would not necessarily be a service, any more than Fire Station number 3 in Julie's example is a service. Fire services is the service. So I would encourage you to think about what public service it is that the Boys and Girls Club is providing and what local government it's collaborating with in order to provide that service. So you're going to have to link the Boys and Girls Club's work back to the umbrella of the service and to the local government that's charged with providing that service. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes, thank you. And then one final question, and this one may be a little specific, but I'll spit it out there for you. Our county is scheduled to complete our SDS update on February 23rd, and DCA and the Regional Commission know about the update, but do we still need to file a request for an extension?
I'll just, since I'm on a roll, I'll take a stab at that one too. Sure, yeah, we would definitely recommend anyone that is that close to their deadline at the middle, go ahead, and if you're worried about going out of compliance, please go ahead and submit an extension request. And it's not even an extension request. I mean, it's more of an extension notification. You guys are letting us know that you guys have decided to extend it. But we don't have an approval or a rejection on your document. You know, it's about you communicating it to us. So the worry being that DCA has up to 30 days within which to review your SDS update. So even if your document is submitted to us and it is completely perfect right out of the gate, it may not get reviewed until after the deadline. And if it hasn't been completed until after the deadline, then you'll be out of compliance for a while. So by going ahead and extending your deadline to some future date, I'd say if you're looking at a February deadline, I would go ahead and extend it out until June. And that would allow you the sort of wiggle room to accommodate any sort of, any complications that might arise. For instance, if DCA finds a problem with your with the forms and the documents that you've submitted and they need to be revised, then you would have plenty of time to go back and take DCA's comments on that document and to revise them, and to revise the document and resubmit it for another round of review without going out of compliance.
Great. Thank you so much, John and Julie, for participating with us this afternoon. That's all the questions that I have for this segment. We're now
Awesome.
going to transition to Tyler Reinagle, who will present on DCA-based reporting requirements and state survey requirements. I'll turn it over to you, Tyler.
Thank you so much, Kim. I appreciate that. And thanks to John and Julie. Great presentation on planning and service delivery requirements. My name
Thanks,
is Tyler.
Tyler.
Yes. Like Kim said, my name is Tyler Reinagle. I'm the Director of the Office of Planning and Research at DCA. Been with the agency coming up on 4 years now, overseeing John's operation in community, local, and regional planning operations, as well as our offices of mapping and research. And today we're going to talk specifically about the research requirements. Now, for those of you who have been through this process before, a lot of this is probably going to sound somewhat familiar, but I would beg your indulgence to pay particular attention because, like most everything in our worlds, COVID has thrown a little bit of a wrench into the reporting requirements, specifically some extensions that may be applicable to your community that could be very important when it comes to a CDBG application. So during the next 20 to 30 minutes or so, we're going to talk about the two absolute requirements when it comes to a CDBG application, the GOMI or Government Management Indicator Survey, as well as the Report of Local Government Finance or RLGF. We'll also talk about a couple of other research functions and submissions that are due throughout the year, as well as the ability to check your own compliance to make sure that your community is eligible when it comes to reporting requirements at DCA. We'll wrap up with some questions and discussion if anyone would like to ask any questions about these requirements and what services and what functions we can provide in our office for you as an applicant. So we'll start off with one of the two absolute non-negotiables when it comes to CDBG applications, and that's the Government Management Indicator Survey. Now, the GOMI is a statutorily required survey that is due for all of the state's 689 local governments, regardless of how big or small, regardless of city, county, or consolidated government. It is due for all local governments by June 30th of each calendar year. Now, what you see on the right here is a screenshot of that web-based reporting platform that's used for these submissions. Every local government in the state is issued what's known as a City County ID and Password, or PSYCO ID and Password that you see here. If you're a county government, that ID will start with the number 1. If you're a municipal government, it will start with the number 2. And if you're a consolidated government like Athens, Clarke, or Columbus, Muskogee, that'll start with the number 3. Now, if you or anyone in your city, county, or consolidated government needs to get this ID and password, you can email that request to dca.research@dca.ga.gov, and a member of the research staff will get that back to you the same business day. Now, when you log in, this is the platform that you'll see. This example happens to be from the city of Jessup, but you'll see this for all of the jurisdictions that may be logging in. The requirement for the Community Development Block Grant application is that the 3 most recent calendar year surveys be complete. You can see here, this is a screenshot for 2018, 2019, and 2020, the 3 most recent surveys that the city of Jessup has completed, as indicated by the yeses down the middle column there. Now, if you have not completed a particular year for this requirement, you will see a red no in that area, and you'll be able to complete that survey online. Now, the survey itself is a 9-part survey, which sounds somewhat daunting, but it addresses all of the different aspects of local government service delivery. Again, this is an example from the city of Jessup in the screenshot here, indicating that all 9 of those sections with the green check mark have been completed, and the survey has been submitted, indicated by the green checkbox down under the certification at the bottom of the page you see here. If the green checkbox is not by the certification, then the survey has not been submitted, and you are not in compliance with these GOMI requirements. Now, one of the things we do provide on our website is a PDF version of the survey. That way you're able to download it and print it, and if you have a city clerk or a county administrator that's responsible for completing the survey, they're able to prepare that ahead of time by having conversations with the police chief or the planning and zoning director or finance director and others who may have more specific information on a particular aspect of the survey. But while we make this PDF version available for prep work, we will not accept written copies of the survey mailed to our office or faxed or scanned. This has to be completed through the web-based platform that you see here for all local governments. The second absolute requirement when it comes to a CDBG application is the report of local government finance. This is another statutory requirement for all 689 local governments. Now, this varies from the local government audit, which is a requirement due to Jackie Newbert and her team at the Department of Audits and Accounts, but both are statutory requirements. Jackie will talk more about that DOAA requirement, but we'll talk specifically here about the RLGF. Now, the RLGF is a standardized locked Excel document that's downloaded from the DCA website and is completed and emailed back to us as that same Excel document. The RLGF, as it has been for the past 4 years or so, is based on the Uniform Chart of Accounts. So on the right-hand side of the screen here, you see a screenshot of the first page of the RLGF, indicating, for instance, on the first line, the UCOA code 31.1100 for property taxes. And this runs throughout the Uniform Chart of Accounts and throughout the Report of Local Government Finance. One area to bring attention to is that with the Uniform Chart of Account updates last year, the RLGF submission form was in turn updated. So now when you download that form from the DCA website, you'll see for 2020 or later use only at the top green circle. And on the bottom, the drop-down menu has now been extended through fiscal year 2025. So this updated version of the form, the update from May 2020, should be used moving forward. Now, typically, this report is due within 6 months of the conclusion of the local government's fiscal year. So if your fiscal year ends June 30th, the report would be due December 31st. I'll offer a caveat there, and we're going to talk a little bit more about COVID-related extensions in a couple of slides, and that's where we need to pay particular attention as it relates to due dates. Now, similar to the GOMI survey, the 3 most recent years are required in order to be eligible for the Community Development Block Grant application. And this form can be downloaded from our website. As I said, this is a locked Excel document that needs to be emailed back to us as an Excel document in order to be accepted. Once that is submitted, you'll receive a confirmation email from the research staff indicating that your report was successfully uploaded to the statewide database. A few reminders on the RLGF. There are COVID-related extensions that we're going to talk about on the next slide, but the standard due date is within 6 months of the conclusion of the local government's fiscal year. Second, make sure that these are submitted as the Excel documents that they're saved as, that they're not saved as PDF or Word or other type files. We aren't able to upload those to the statewide database, and submitting it as a PDF document or some other type of file will result in a delay of compliance and the uploading of that document. Another reminder, RLGF submissions do not have to be audited figures. Of course, while we would prefer to have audited figures, there are circumstances that often will delay that audit beyond the 6-month window. So you see in the green circle here, there's a drop-down yes/no question on whether this report is using audited figures. It's more important to get that 6-month deadline met without audited figures to maintain compliance for funding and programs, including the Community Development Block Grant. And if an audit leads to a change in the RLGF submission, research staff can work with you to get an updated version of the RLGF reflecting that audited information. A lot of communities have tended to delay submission of their RLGF because their audit is not complete, which jeopardizes their eligibility for funding and program designations. Now, as I mentioned, this year is somewhat peculiar because of COVID and the extensions that have been offered through Governor Kemp's executive order. Beginning about a year ago, Governor Kemp declared a public health state of emergency. And as a part of that executive order from the governor's office, there were one-time 90-day extensions offered for both Department of Audits and Accounts audit submissions and DCA Report of Local Government Finance submissions. Now, in subsequent months, Governor Kemp has extended that public health emergency declaration, which has resulted in some extensions of RLGF submission deadlines. Now, at this point, all FY 2019 submissions have expired, submission extensions, have expired, which means that FY 19 RLGF submissions are all delinquent if they have not already been submitted. FY 2020 presents a little bit more of a challenge. To this point, all FY 2020 end dates through November 30th of 2020 have received a one-time 90-day extension by virtue of the governor's executive order. At this point, those jurisdictions with a December 31st, 2020 fiscal year end date have not received that extension from the governor's office. That's not to say that it will not be forthcoming, it just is not in place as of yesterday at the close of business. So as of today, those jurisdictions with a December 31st, 2020 fiscal year end date have a due date for their RLGF of June 30th, 2021. Now, it is very possible that this could be extended. So one of the things that we ask you in your jurisdiction to do is make sure your contact information with DCA is up to date. That way communication gets out as quickly and effectively as possible. Now, to that end, the Office of Research operates a number of other reporting platforms. Now, while these are not required for compliance for CDBG purposes, they are vital in a number of other areas. And we make access to that through our 2021 Schedule of Surveys and Reports. This is available as a PDF document that includes direct links to the individual reporting pages on the DCA website, so no more of the hunt and peck that you may have had to do on our website previously. And it also includes the due date and primary point of contact for each of these reporting requirements. We release this in November of every calendar year, and we always encourage you to download this to make sure that both the local government and any local authorities in that local government are up to date and aware of all of their reporting requirements. I mentioned updating your local government contact information. This is a vitally important resource for DCA as it allows us to get in the quickest and most direct contact with city or county leadership, including chief elected officials, city and county clerks, city and county managers or administrators, and finance directors, among many, many others. So we ask that you take some time in the next couple of days to log in and make sure that the contact information for your jurisdiction is up to date. This will be particularly important if Governor Kemp extends the public health emergency declaration and RLGF extensions are offered to those jurisdictions with a December 31st FY 2020 end date. That will offer a 90-day extension, which will give more flexibility, and we want to make sure to get that to you as quickly as possible if and when that comes. We also administer the wage and salary survey, and this includes salary ranges and employment figures for all local governments for about 200 different positions that exist in local government. This is a valuable resource for your colleagues and counterparts across the state as it helps do salary surveys for recruitment and retention purposes in local governments. Among all of our programs, this is easily the most requested database with which we work. Third, for those jurisdictions that collect a hotel-motel excise tax of between 2% and 8%, we maintain the hotel-motel excise tax reporting platform. Now, this only applies if your jurisdiction has this excise tax in place, but is also administered by our office and is required to continue collections of the tax year to year. We also maintain reporting for local authorities. Now, this could include downtown development authorities, hospital authorities, housing authorities, and others. But if it is a local authority, it has that same reporting requirement to our office with that link included on the 2021 calendar of surveys and reports. And lastly, our office maintains the debt issuance reporting. And anytime a local government or local authority issues or refinances debt in excess of $1 million, that is required to be reported to DCA within 60 days of issuance. Similar to the RLGF, this is a locked Excel document that's available for download on our website and is emailed back into our office once it is complete by the local jurisdiction. And we'll wrap up by talking about compliance and how to make sure that your jurisdiction is compliant. Now, if you go to the DCA research website, you see here with a picture of the gears, there is a tab called Compliance, that blue link on the right-hand column. If you click on that link, you will get a downloadable PDF document that includes all delinquencies as of that day. Now, this document is updated every Friday, but you can email jurisdiction-specific inquiries to our research office and we'll help you confirm that you are eligible for any sort of application or program designation. Now, as a reminder, this only includes DCA research requirements. This does not include reporting requirements such as a local government audit to DOAA, or things like the service delivery strategy or comprehensive plan that John and Julie talked about a little bit earlier. But all of the jurisdictions listed on this document have some delinquency that would render them ineligible for CDBG or other funding or program designations. So if your jurisdiction's name appears on this list, you want to reach out to us and make sure to get that rectified as quickly and as soon as possible. And with that, Kim, I will turn it back over to you and take any questions that may exist.
Thanks, Tyler. I really appreciate it. In looking at the questions panel, currently we have no questions for your session, so that means you did a wonderful job.
Either that or people just don't want to hear me drone on anymore.
So thank you very much for participating with us and sharing the information today. We're now going to turn over to Jackie Newbert. Jackie is with the Department of Audits and Accounts, and she will share with us the reporting requirements for local governments. Take it away, Jackie.
Thank you, Kim, and thank you for inviting me. And I'm going to share my screen now for my presentation. And in just a moment. And here we go. So, and hopefully you're seeing my screen, which is my presentation. And some of it is going to be similar to Tyler's. It's just more DOAA focused. And I just want to make sure that that you know that we have a lot of I guess non-compliance listings, for lack of a better term, and that we do try to keep up to date, and especially the local government reporting one. As far as that one, we used to do every quarter, but I'm trying to be more timely and make sure that that's coming out every like maybe every 15th of the month. So I want to have it so that everybody can be updated and all the agencies can be updated, and around the 15th. So we're going to just go over. I know the slideshow, if you have that or in printout, it's kind of, it appears lengthy, but it's really not. It'll probably be about 30 minutes long, and we're going to go over some of the state compliance laws related to local government and DOAA, and the various reports that are submitted to DOAA, along with some submission deadlines, which Tyler's gone over some already, that apply to both of us, and the possible consequences for noncompliance. We're going to kind of focus on the three main areas, which are the annual financial audits or agreed upon procedures, and the annual immigration compliance reporting, the 5 areas, but we're going to focus on 2 that have consequences for noncompliance, and then our biennial reporting of local retirement plans. And the general one is, and you can see the code sections on the screen, and it's important to note that when Tyler was mentioning the public health emergency extensions, the 90-day extensions, it kind of affected the 36817, which requires the annual audits that you're required to submit to the state auditor's office. And then we're going to go over the 2 parts of the immigration compliance reporting, which is in the state law at Title 50, 36.4, and then the retirement ones, which are in Title 47. And as we know that in this will be familiar, the OCGA 36817 requires annual audits for each unit of local government, and that is defined by municipality, county, and consolidated governments and other political subdivisions or local government authorities. And the other political subdivisions part is if those authorities, such as water authorities, joint development authorities, airport authorities, if they're created as an other political subdivision, then the provisions and the reporting requirements of 36817 apply, and they should be submitted to the state auditor's office, your annual audits, or agreed upon procedures if applicable. It does not the regional commissions also submit their audit reports, but they're under a different code section, and they fall under 5838. And as we all know that the annual audits are statutorily required to be submitted to the state auditor within 180 days after the close of the fiscal year. And submission deadlines were extended, as Tyler mentioned, between March 14th, 2020, and the 90 days following the expiration of the public health emergency declaration, which the current one ends on March 7th. And the latest executive order was issued on January 29th, and as Tyler mentioned, the one in April provided that certain local governments with the 90-day extensions for statutorily required reports, such as the audit report and the RLGF. And as Tyler similarly had this one, we're up to the November 30s, and we're still, that doesn't mean that the December 31, 2020s, that it might be extended as well. And you're not, until that due date you're not delinquent until that due date, but that doesn't mean that other agencies or federal agencies have the same hardship extension. So, and as Tyler mentioned earlier about all of the 2019, they've expired now as well. And so the state auditor is authorized by state law to grant extensions if the government is eligible. The 90 days extension, those were automatic, and they're not. But as far as the Department of Audits and the audit reports, if you needed the additional 90 days, and if you were eligible, if the government was eligible, they were granted. But of course, since we're past December 31, 2020, those have expired as well. And just a reminder that we may grant extensions for 2 consecutive years and then not the 3rd year, and late submissions count as extensions. And then, as I mentioned, the agreed upon procedures, that's in lieu of an audit if your expenditures and expenses of all funds and activities are less than $550,000. And there is also an option of the biennial audit covering 2 fiscal years, but each year must be less of the level of expenditures and expenses must be less than $550,000. Then, and when we say all funds and activities, that includes expenditures for grant proceeds or SLOSS proceeds, and sometimes you may receive large grants, so that may kick you over. And then of course, the expenses from the enterprise funds, they're also included, which is the water system or gas system. And after it's submitted, we go through our DES review, and audits may not be accepted due to material deficiencies noted during our review. And that's important for our non-compliance listing that I mentioned earlier that I'm trying to get on a monthly basis now, because that is coded. There are 2 codes that affect, and it's one that's coded 1A if I don't have the report, or if the Department of Audits we don't have the report. And it's 1B if we had material deficiencies noted during our review and they were not corrected. And for example, it could be the omission of the auditor's report or the government auditing standards report, Yellow Book report, internal compliance report. And if your audit firm did not have a valid license to practice accounting in Georgia, and if the opinion was adverse, meaning the financial statements were not fairly presented with GAAP, and if a fund was presented as a non-major fund when it met the criteria for a major fund presentation, that's considered material, and would need to have reissued, or in other words, correct that to get that audit coverage as well. And if the two schedules based on the reconciliation of fund balance to net position and changes in fund balance and changes in net position, if they weren't submitted, and also a big one is items that were noted during our review that were also noted in the prior year, and in other words, were not corrected during the current fiscal period. Those we won't accept until we get reissued. And now we'll kind of go on to the immigration compliance reporting, and I'll kind of stop here because and kind of piggyback off something Tyler said about the contact information. And it's kind of important because it's important to keep our Department of Audit's contact information updated. And the best way is this immigration compliance collection system, because we kind of pull whenever we do any of the non-compliance listings, and when we get to the biennial retirement reporting, when we send those surveys, we pull the contact listing from all of our databases that we have. So if you can go in and change your contact information at any time from your account. You can remove people, you know, someone else can gain access. So it's very important to keep that contact information updated for us. And the immigration compliance reporting, and this is kind of important too, because we're going every year. You can see on the last bullet point, the system opens on November 1st. So the system will send emails to whatever contact email that we have in the immigration system. So if it's going to the wrong person, then it may affect your compliance later on, as we'll see in a couple of slides. But it's the requirement is in OCGA 5036-4, and it requires governmental entities to report their annual immigration compliance. And this is more than just cities and counties. It's community service boards, it's local authorities, it's library systems, it's state agencies, it's local boards of education. So it's all governmental entities in Georgia. And the report should be filed by December 31st each year. That's stated in state law. And our next reporting period will be December 1st, 2020 through November 30, 2021. And of course, the system will open on November 1st, 2021. So you want to be prepared before that actual date, because it is an annual report, and it may come up, you know, fast at the end of the year. And to a complete submission to the Immigration and Reform Act collection system, there are 5 parts that are the confirmation that you're reporting on, and it's self-reporting. The first one is the E-Verify number, and that's a reporting of the government's number, it meaning the date of authorization. And once you confirm that at one point, it'll carry on year after year. The second section is the Title 13 or contract reporting section, and Title 36, the business license section. And then the fourth is the sanctuary policy section, which is OCGA 368023, and the Title 50, which is the public benefits. We're going to focus on the Title 13 and contract reporting, as well as the sanctuary policy section, because those two have consequences for non-compliance. So that's what we're going to focus on today. And that's when I say complete, those 5 sections may have it, you know, that is a complete submission, but these two have consequences if you don't go in and self-report. And you can see that the contract reporting, they're required by provisions of OCGA 131091, and then the provisions of 3680-23 requires that the government, the confirmation that the government is in compliance with 3680-23. And we'll start with the Title 13 E-Verify contract reporting, because that is probably, if you do have contracts over this limit, if it's a non-bid contract, which is basically 2,500, then you're supposed to, it's contracts for physical performance of service, and you should be reporting those in this system. And it applies to all non-bid contracts, that threshold. But if you're using a bid process, it requires affidavits regardless of the amount. And it includes like audit services, contracts for audit services, and things like that, and maintenance fees. So you want to make sure that you're reporting all of your contracts. And if failure to complete the Title 13 section or area may result in exclusion from the list of qualified local governments. And that it's important to note that right now we don't really, it's a self-reporting system, and we so far currently do not basically audit that. It's just that you go in and self-report those contracts. And there is an option that if you did not have contracts, there's an option for that as well. And as I've stated several times, the report's due on December 31st. There are no extensions, and it's I guess a hard deadline, the December 31st. And after December 31st, the Department of Audits and Accounts is required to provide political subdivisions 30 days to demonstrate compliance, which are basically from the list of qualified local governments, the cities and counties and municipalities and consolidated governments. We've already issued that for this year for the non-compliant ones. And they were notified on January 21. So that 30-day period, we're required to give, since we're required to give 30 days basically notice for the non-compliance or the non-compliant governments to demonstrate compliance. That 30-day period will end on February 26. And we intend to, soon after that deadline it has come, then we're going to start the notification process to the Department of Community Affairs. And basically, we've already notified those municipalities, consolidated city, county governments, and counties of any non-compliance. And then, so after that, we're required by law to notify the Commissioner of DCA, and that DCA should exclude the governments that are not in compliance from their list of qualified local governments. So, and that affects several things, including the CDBG program. And as we know, the failure to be recognized as a qualified local government may jeopardize funding from any grants or loans made through DCA, and including the state community development program. And that is listed in the provisions of OCGA 58. Now, the sanctuary policy reporting is basically a question, and it's the fourth area, but it's just a question of whether or not you are in compliance with that code section. And it requires the confirmation that the governments did not enact any sanctuary policies. And of course, the law says that, state law says that no local governing body shall enact, adopt, implement, or enforce any sanctuary policy. And the report kind of includes well, it does include, not kind of, it includes a question that asks whether or not sanctuary policies were enacted. And that's just and it means any sanctuary policy means any rule, regulation, policy, or practice adopted by the local local governing body which prohibits or restricts local officials from communicating or cooperating with federal law enforcement. And the question kind of asked, and it kind of confirms that no sanctuary policies were enacted, and that the government is in compliance with provisions of OCGA 3680-23. And that appears in the little box once you choose your answer. It will say, you know, either the you know, blank city has not enacted any sanctuary policies and therefore is in compliance with the provisions, and or if you do have enacted and you choose that, it says you're not in compliance with the provisions of that code section. And I keep reminding folks that it is due by December 31st, but our system kind of sends out several emails, and we as a team, we send out several emails that kind of remind you that, you know, it's coming up and it's due on December 31st. And the governments will be reported if the non-compliance with the provisions, meaning the policies were enacted, or if the government failed to confirm, which is like they did not respond and they did not go in and have their answer to this question. And on this one, we don't have to, it is basically, we don't have to give 30 days. It's as of the date we run the report, which to minimize confusion, we kind of do the notifications around the same time so that we don't confuse folks of which ones. It is two separate lists, but it's basically, it'll be done at the same time. So around February 26th, we'll issue the report as well. We're required to, and this time we're required to notify DCA as well as the Georgia Department of Transportation and all other agencies that provide funding. So I usually just use the same notification listings that I have for the local quarterly or monthly non-compliance with reporting, and for this list as well. And so that way, you know, I'm covering all state agencies. And the notification includes both sanctuary policy non-compliance as well as the non-respondent. And proof of compliance is with the provisions of OCGA 3680-23 is a conditioning of funding, which is why we're required to notify all the state agencies. And the reporting of local government retirement plans, we publish every 2 years a report in order to fulfill the reporting requirement in OCGA 47-1 and provide information about local retirement plans in Georgia and their adherence to the Public Retirement System Standards Law. The two areas of compliance with statutory requirements that are non-compliant would be reported to the state treasurer. And there are two sections. And if you look at our report that we just issued, we do have, we had two governments in I guess the reporting requirements and then one in the funding requirements. So the reporting requirements is just that the state treasurer is notified of any non-compliance and is required to withhold state funds payable until the actuarial investigation and financial reports are submitted. And the funding requirements are, it's located in the actuarial investigation, but it's if the non-compliance is required for the state treasurer, notification, and state funds will be withheld until funding in conformity with the minimum funding standards, and that's a requirement. It's issued every 2 years. Our latest one was issued on January 1, 2021. This time we notified 2145 governmental units, and we contacted municipalities, counties, consolidated governments, regional commission, local boards of education, and local authorities. And the number of retirement local retirement plans it's a total of 458, which includes closed plans, and some governments have more than one plan. And 20% of the governmental units that responded that they have local retirement plans. And we had a total of 606 governmental units that did not respond, or about 28%. And there's also a schedule in the report that indicates the governments that did not respond to our survey. And so the survey is kind of a separate, it's kind of all part of the one survey. Everything's electronic now, but part of it is on the retirement plan itself, and part of it is for the survey. And the greater our response is, it means that we'll have a more accurate report every 2 years, and we also, as a review team, we also kind of look at those answers especially for the other post-employment benefits OPEB survey. We look at those during our reviews and make sure that the disclosures in your financial statements are required to be there, or should be there. The retirement plan surveys includes the defined contribution plan, but of course, you know, the actuary investigation, that's not included in that. But that helps us with our reviews as well, because we know, and it's kind of important to make sure that you report those and report it correctly, because we're going to go from all the responses, we're going to use that during our reviews. And so you may get a comment from us that you didn't disclose any information about a defined contribution plan when you really don't have one, but our records show that you do. So if you don't contact us during that, you know, right when you get the review results letters from us, then if we have to cite it again, we try not to, but it may affect compliance if we don't know that that it's incorrect answer. And the OPEB survey also includes information about deferred compensation plans and post-employment healthcare benefits and other post-employment benefits such as life insurance, etc. And on that again, those two items, it affects our reviews, because we look at the disclosures that are required for those. And then again, getting back to the previous slide, and if you have the OPEB or any of those items on that what we call the OPEB survey, we like to make, there's a schedule in the report that also kind of tells everyone what your government is offering. And so we're going to try to improve that this next year, during the next year, or the next 2 years before the next one. And so that to make it more, you know, user friendly and I guess, so to make the information more valuable. So hopefully you'll be hearing from us during the next couple of years to kind of make sure that happens. And the timeline, it'll begin as soon as the 2022 state legislative session ends, and then the notifications will be emailed in August of 2022. And then everything's on electronic. It's everything, even if you have to submit actuarial investigations or any of the investment surveys or whatever, they have to be electronic as well. And then we'll prepare the report based on our surveys received, and our next publication will be January 1, 2023. And again, this one is all electronic. It's notifications and reporting. And we do go by whoever reported in the prior time. So whoever reported to us in the 2020 and for the January 1, 2021 publication, if we have, that's who we're going to contact when we try to, this is another one where we try to make sure that we're having the correct surveys or the correct contact information based on our other applications or collection systems. And compliance status can be confirmed at any time. We may issue, like, say for instance, the local government one at least every quarter, but you know, at any time, any agency or any government can call and ask us to confirm compliance. It includes all, it mostly is the immigration and the local government reports. And you can email us at those 3 boxes, or either Eric, Moody, and we have our email addresses there. We'll get in touch with you about compliance. And our telephone number is our section telephone number. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer those at now.
Thank you, Jackie, so much. I really appreciate you being with us today and providing your expertise for the Department of Audits and Accounts. In looking at the questions related to audits, we had one question. Since the immigration compliance reporting isn't due until December 31st, so that would have been December 31st, 2020, will this reporting requirement affect CDBG applications with a June 4th deadline? Personally, I don't see that it would, as long as they met that compliance by December 31st, 2020, and they're not listed on the Department of Non-Compliance listing, they would be eligible to apply on the June 4th deadline.
Yes, and it's when we issue the report, you know, the state auditor wants the non-compliance reports to be out by March 1st this time. So once we issue that, then you're considered non-compliance, in non-compliance with the 2020 immigration compliance reporting.
Okay, great.
And we try to up those as well. And it's mostly, I'm not going to say that I'll do it every month, but at least a quarter. But you know, you can. That's one that you at any time we'll be happy to confirm compliance or tell you that you're in non-compliance and tell you what you need. Because we have some emails that we send out, you know, a lot, because people sometimes if we don't have the correct information, we may be sending it to someone who's left the government. And so then, and especially the local government authorities, those sometimes we have a hard time getting contact information for. So, but we'll be happy to confirm compliance at any time.
Okay, great. That's the last question that I have in the chat box. But we did want to clarify some information that was shared earlier with when Brent was presenting about the importance of submitting your local government audits to the Department of Audits and Accounts.
Yes.
It's the website where you would find that listing. It's www.audits.ga.gov/NALGAD/resource.html. This is a screenshot of what that page looks like. And if you scroll about 2/3 towards the page where I've highlighted a listing of non-compliant local governments, that's where you will actually see the listing of those that are currently not compliant, and what Jackie was speaking of earlier today. Additionally, did you have something to say, Jackie, about that?
Yes, and I always, even though we posted that listing out there, please contact us if you're like on the list, or if like even agencies, if they're on the list, because you know, we can post it, but as soon as the mail comes or our collection system, which we hope everyone is submitting electronically, as soon as I get the report, you can come off that list. So it's very important that you kind of confirm.
Right. So we wanted to make sure that you guys knew exactly how to get to that site. But again, please contact Jackie if you have any specific questions, and her team will be able to assist you. Also, Tyler wanted us to make sure that we reminded everyone that should the governor extend the public health emergency and extend the RLGF and audit submission deadlines for the December 30, for this, with those with FY 2020 end of December 31st deadlines, the chief elected official will receive a joint letter from DCA and the Departments of Audits and Accounts notifying this of this action. This extension would be automatic, and the details would be sent to the contact persons that's listed in DCA's local government contacts database. So there again is another plug for you to make sure that your contact information is up to date in the DCA local government contact information. All right. Thank you so much, Jackie, again for joining us. We'll have another general question session at the end where participants may have another opportunity to ask you a question.
Okay.
All right. Until then, we're going to go ahead and turn it over now to Santiago Martinez, who works for the Historic Preservation Division, which is now a part of DCA and the DCA family. So we're so happy to have Santiago with us today to present on Section 106 review.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Santiago Martinez. I'm the guy who's talking right now. Most folks just call me Santi, and I am an environmental review historian for the Georgia Historic Preservation Division, or HPD. So I review all of the HUD projects, which means I'm also the guy who is going to guide your project through the review process when you submit it to our office. And so our office is the State Historic Preservation Office, or SHPO for Georgia. HPD and SHPO are basically synonymous terms. HPD is what we call ourselves, but SHPO is like the more official legal term. And so today we're going to talk about Section 106 review, and basically we're going to talk about our involvement with DCA and HUD programs. And just an important note for this presentation is when I refer to DCA, I'm referring to the other divisions that administer funds. So if I'm talking about us, I'll talk about HPD, but when I refer to DCA, that's what I'm talking about. We got a lot to cover and not a lot of time to do it, so I'll try to keep it as brief as possible. And I'm going to move pretty quickly, but hopefully not at an overwhelming pace. Okay. Sorry, I don't know how to actually, oh, there we go, advance through my slides there. All right, so our mission statement as a division is to promote the preservation and use of historic places. And the use part is really the important one, because, you know, that's really what we want. You know, a historic resource that's being used is one that's also being preserved. And there's a bunch of other benefits too, but we don't really have time for that. But, you know, basically we provide consultation to federal and state agencies under Section 106, as well as the Georgia Environmental Policy Act, or JEPA. And if you go through the JEPA review, you'll actually be dealing with another reviewer named Stacy Rickey. And some of you might be familiar with her because she used to do the HUD stuff. An important note also is that we're not a decision-making agency, HPD, and I'll get into that a little more. But it's basically DCA and HUD are the ones who make the decisions during this process, and like I said, we'll get into that more. But what we focus on exclusively is how your project is going to affect historic resources. So our statutory authority comes from the National Historic Preservation Act, or NHPA. This was first signed into law in 1966 by the Johnson administration. It's been amended a few times since then. And this did a whole bunch of stuff. So, it's federal law, and it created the SHPOs. It also created the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation, or ACHP. They're a 23-member advisory board that advises the president and other federal level entities on preservation policy and issues. Of course, everybody knows, the National Register of Historic Places. That's basically just like the nation's kind of official list of significant historic properties, and it's maintained by the Department of the Interior. And it also created this Section 106 review process that we're going to talk about. And what it does is it requires federal agencies to take into account the effects of their undertakings on historic properties. And we'll get into that in a second. I think I'm actually going to skip over this. We have a lot of really cool programs that I'd love to tell you about, but unfortunately we just don't have enough time. But we have some federal level programs and some state level programs that kind of tend to complement those federal programs. But if you have a specific question about that, just ask me at the end. Right, okay, so we're going to talk about environmental review in Section 106. So as I mentioned before, basically what this does is it requires federal agencies to take into account the effects that their undertakings will have on historic properties. So, all right, well, what's an undertaking? So an undertaking is a project, activity, or program that is funded in whole or in part under the direct or indirect jurisdiction of a federal agency, including those that are carried out by or on behalf of a federal agency, those carried out with federal financial assistance, and those requiring a federal permit, license, or approval. Okay, so what does that mean? Basically, it just means if a federal agency is involved in your project, then Section 106 compliance is going to be required. Pretty much simple as that. And like, these undertakings can be a wide range of things. Like, I think a really common misconception that people have is that this review process only applies to them if their review actually, or if their project is around a historic property, and that's not true. What triggers it is the fact that there's federal involvement, which in the case of CDBG stuff is HUD is giving you money. So if HUD's giving you money, it has to undergo Section 106 review, basically. But while we're talking about historic properties, that basically is any prehistoric or historic district, site, building, structure, or object included in or eligible for inclusion in the National Register of Historic Places. And the eligible part here is also really important, right? Because like, we're not just looking at stuff that's already listed on the National Register. We're also taking into account anything that is eligible and maybe just hasn't been looked at before to assess its eligibility. So that's basically what we do, is we kind of help you through this project or this process. We're a required consulting party, as I think I mentioned before, so you have to consult with us. And so we look at maybe 1,500 to 25 projects a year, give or take. And just to kind of put some perspective on this, like, we're not even in the middle of February, right? And I've already looked at over 100 HUD projects this year. And HUD's not the only agency that I look at. And I bring that up because, we have a legally mandated 30-day review period. And, just because of the volume of reviews, we typically need about that whole 30 days to get through any given project. So that's just something to think about. We really appreciate people's patience on that. Okay, right. So as I mentioned before, what kind of projects do we look at? I mean, it can be a very insanely wide variety. There's some really big ticket items that are pretty much exactly the type of things you think about when you think about government projects. So, road stuff through the Federal Highway Administration, or like sewer water projects. through the Environmental Protection Agency. But then there's like the less obvious stuff, you know, like Army Corps of Engineer wetland permits or FDIC licensing for new bank branches. And then of course there's, you know, there's HUD and all the stuff that HUD does, which is, you know, pretty much why we're here today. Why is this thing not advancing? There we go. All right. So section 106 more or less has 4 steps, primary steps: initiation, identification, assessment of adverse effects, and resolution of adverse effects, if any. So most reviews probably only need to go to the 2nd or 3rd step. Like most of the time, there's either no historic properties to worry about, or what the project is doing is, you know, it's not going to adversely affect any historic properties. But, you know, and we'll talk about this more, every now and then we do have to move into that adverse effects stage. We'll do that in a little more detail here in a second. Right, so consultation. So if we kind of loop back to the beginning, you know, as I mentioned, DCA administers a lot of HUD funds, and HUD's a federal agency, and the federal agency involvement is what triggers Section 106, you know, the need for Section 106 review. So that's basically why we're all here. You know, because some federal agencies, HUD included, they delegate this Section 106 responsibility to their applicants, which is most of you guys. So, you know, you're required by federal law to consult with us. And if you don't, you run the risk of losing your money, basically. So next, we are going to look at our environmental review form, which is available on our website. And you know, this is kind of like the basic thing that you will want to complete when you want to submit a project. And I think you can find it pretty easily by Googling as well. If you just Google like GA SHPO ER form, it should be like one of the first things that pops up. And basically what it tries to do is it tries to gather the basic amount of information we need to complete a review. And there's really a few big things that we're looking for, which is, you know, we need to know what's happening, as in like, you know, detailed plans, detailed scope of work. We need to know where it's happening. So, you know, we need maps, and then kind of also part of that is photographs, you know, to show us what, you know, what's going on here. All right, so the first page, you'll kind of note that one of the first things on there talks about that 30-day review period. And one of the things about that 30-day review period is if we don't get the information that we need the first time, we might have to ask for more information. And there's a possibility if we have to do that, sometimes the 30-day review period restarts once we get all the information we need. So that's why I'm really trying to stress here the importance of like being as detailed as you can up front, because nobody wants this. Nobody wants to have that kind of delay. And, you know, it's easier on my end too. You know, when we can just get the review out the door the first time. So, you know, the first part is just like general information. If your project has a name, you'll put it there. If it doesn't have a name, just kind of come up with some basic description. And then project address is obviously that's where the project's happening. You know, it's not like your office address or anything. The federal agency involved in the, you know, for you guys, that's probably always going to be HUD, and state agencies almost always going to be DCA. Agency involvement is probably almost always going to be funding in this case. And for the type of review requested, you know, if it's HUD funding, it'll be Section 106, which is that first box. You know, like I mentioned, sometimes if you're doing like low-income housing tax credits only, that would be a GPO review, which would go to my colleague Stacy, who I mentioned earlier. And if there's any confusion on this, just go ahead and consult the DCA handbook, because all of that stuff should be in there about which type of review your project would need to go through depending on what's going on with the funding. Right, so then we got contact information. That first one is going to be, your contact information, because you're probably the applicant, or if you use a consultant, you'll put their information. And your agency contact info is going to be, the person at HUD or DCA who is helping you out. So like if it's CDBG stuff, it's probably going to be Kathleen Vaughn or Rob Shaw. And then we got page 2. Page 2 is arguably the most important one, because it contains, as I mentioned, your project information. So that's the what's happening aspect. So for project type, just fill out any of those boxes that apply. That's basically just some of the most common, types of projects that we see. So check as many of them that apply, or if none of them apply, you can just check that other box and then write a short little description of a broad category to place your project in. But then B, project description and plans. This is where you want to bring the detail out and be as specific as possible about what's going on. And if it's not going to fit in those few lines, you are absolutely more than welcome to do a separate scope of work write-up, and then you can just put like see attached under those lines there. And if you have plans, that is enormously helpful. So like if you have any, if you're like rehabbing a building and you have elevation drawings of what's going on, that's super helpful. Site plans, if it's like any kind of new construction, things like that are enormously helpful. So, try to include as much of that as possible if you can. And the same thing kind of goes for land disturbing activity. We don't know the extent of ground disturbance, like how deep it's going to be, and things like that, and exactly where it's going to happen. And again, if you have plans relating to that, super helpful, go ahead and include them. Then this next section, we're just basically asking if there's any kind of like concurrent review going on. So like, if you have a phase 2 of a project and phase 1's already been reviewed, then for D, you would put yes. And, if you can, go ahead and dig up that response letter you got. But at the very minimum, we'll need like an HP project number to write down for that. And, some projects, if your subject property is already listed on the National Register of Historic Places, you can get like certain tax incentives and things like that. So you'll also be consulting with our tax department. So, if that's applicable, go ahead and put yes. And then for F is the review to satisfy, application requirements such as for a grant. For most of you folks, that's probably also going to be a yes. And then it asks like if you have the scope of work available. And so we realize that it's not always the case. You may not have that scope of work available, but we would really encourage you to answer yes, if at all possible. And like I said, just include as much information as you can. Or if you don't know information, just be upfront about that. Like, just put, we haven't developed these plans yet, but they might be coming later, or something like that. Site information, this is just pretty much what you know about what may have been going on your subject property in the past. So, this is another one, just check all that apply. Page 3, so, and then again, you want to be detailed as possible here. Describe what currently exists on the property. Is it a house? Is it a school building? Is it just a vacant lot? And if you know the construction date of your subject property, that's also super helpful. So, if you're like rehabbing a house, a good example for this, put, single family home constructed in 1964 or something like that. That's super good to know. And then this cultural resources, this is basically just like, if you know that if there's ever been any kind of either archaeological or historic resources survey conducted in the area, during non-pandemic times, you can come in and look at all of our survey files and figure that out. But if you don't know, you can just put you don't know. But if you do know, try to include, the title and the author and date and all those important details so we can take a look at it too. Then we move on to area of potential effect, or APE. And I think this is kind of a challenging section for people who are not familiar with this process. So we've kind of created this table that should help you identify what your APE is going to be. Most of the time for these kind of projects, it's the subject property itself, as well as any surrounding properties and or setting with a view shed. And we also want to know like what's in the APE. So again, if you could just be as detailed as possible, that is always super helpful. So, like if we go back to our 1964 ranch house, that's a subject property. Maybe it's in a residential neighborhood and it's surrounded by a bunch of other ranch houses that were built in the 60s. That's, good information to include. And then this last section is kind of just much more specific information about things in your APE. So, do you know if it's in a listed district or a district that's been previously determined eligible? Is there anything that's 50 years or older? Do you know if any of that stuff that's 50 years or older has been identified as eligible? Then we move on to the back page, which is effects information. And, this relates to what your project is going to do, basically. So, does it involve rehab, renovation, relocation, demolition, or addition to anything that's 50 years or older? Is it going to take away or change anything about the existing boundaries of those historic properties? Is it going to change the view shed of those properties? Is there going to be any indirect effects to those properties? And an example of that would be like, if you're laying out a bunch of sewer and water lines that is specifically to serve a future industrial development or something like that. Well, that industrial development is an indirect effect. And under the regulations that we operate under, we have to take that into consideration. And then this last part is basically just a checklist of required supplemental materials that are enormously helpful, which is mostly maps and photos, which we're going to get to in a second. And then we have our address down there at the bottom. Oh, wait. No, that is our old address. I'm sorry. Our current address is the DCA headquarters building at 60 Executive Parks in Atlanta. Okay, so maps. So basically, your map just has to be legible. Any of these examples on the screen will work. I mean, personally, I'd probably prefer the middle one or the one on the right, but any of these are acceptable. Just make sure it is clear where your project and its APE are, and just make sure it's scaled appropriately too, not like way too zoomed in or way too zoomed out. And if there's a lot going on your map, try to include like some kind of key or something like that. That'll help, and make sure that your street names are legible and easily readable. That's very helpful. Which brings us to photos. So these 4 photos on the right that I don't know if you guys can see, I'm circling my cursor around. This is not what to do, or this is a bad example of what to do. So don't do this. This is bad. Do this on the right here. And basically what the deal is here is we need to be able to see, if possible, the entire elevation of a building. So, like that first photo, we can't see the whole thing. So, and that's not optimal, basically. The second one's, it's a little too far out. We need to be able to see detail, like the materials of the building, because those can give us clues if there has been any kind of like rehabilitation, or if it's original material or non-historic material. Make sure it's not too dark. Again, for basically the same reason, we do need to be able to discern details. And And then this fourth photo is, you know, I mean, you can't even see what's going on because there's a tree in the way. And then also you can see the line on the ground that this came from Google Earth or something like that. And, you know, we don't accept those kind of submissions because, like, we already have access to Google Earth and, like, tax assessor photos. And usually that stuff is not the most up to date. So it's really not that helpful in assessing what's going on. So, you know, just make sure you have good current photos in color that, like I said, hopefully are more similar to this one on the right and don't look like any of these four on the left here. Okay, so kind of just to summarize that again, just, you know, make sure you're filling out as completely as possible. And then another good thing to keep in mind is that I know absolutely nothing about your project until I see this form. So, you know, keep that in mind when you're preparing it. Because, you know, you're probably really familiar with the details of your project, but I'm not. So again, you know, just be as specific as possible. Too much detail is always better than too little. So, you know, I don't mind if you throw a lot at me. You know, make sure you have a good, nice map that shows your subject property and its APE, and that you got, you know, nice, good current photographs that are also in color. And another thing about photographs too is if your photos can help explain your scope of work, you know, you should always include that. So, like, you know, for example, if you're wanting to fix up a house and it needs windows to be replaced or something because the current windows are like really deteriorated and about to fall out, show us that damage, please. You know, go ahead and take a picture of the window. You know, if you're repairing a crack in the chimney, show us the crack. Things like that are enormously helpful. Okay, so, all right, you got your ER form and all your supporting materials. So what happens when you send it to us? So when we receive the projects, we log them into our tracking system and get them routed to the appropriate reviewers. And when we first receive a project, we will try our best to look it over, give it a once over, and make sure that you have all of the necessary information. And if you don't, we'll try to reach out by email and let you know what information we need, so that way we can keep everything on track. And then, like I said, you know, we kind of, once we have all that information, we evaluate it and kind of get it assessed, and then we'll respond to you by email. So that's another important part with the ER form, is make sure that you include a good current email address for yourself, because that's how we get the letter to you. And like I said, most reviews end in either no historic properties affected, or no adverse effect, or maybe no adverse effect, but we have a couple conditions on there, something like that. But you know, now we're going to talk about, so what happens if there's an adverse effect? So an adverse effect is when an undertaking may alter directly or indirectly any of the characteristics of a historic property that qualify the property for inclusion in the National Register in a manner that would diminish the integrity of the property's location, design, setting, materials, workmanship, feeling, or association. So there's a couple of things to keep in mind here. An adverse effect is not the end of the process, and it also doesn't mean that a project cannot be completed. It just kind of adds a few more steps to the process. And another important thing to keep in mind here is an adverse effect is not like it's not a value judgment on your project. Like, we don't judge the merits of your project in any way, shape, or form. Because, you know, I know with like CDBG, it's a competitive award process, so you guys usually have to demonstrate the need for your project. But when you're sending it in for HPUD review, that's completely irrelevant. You know, we might think your project is the greatest thing in the world, but if it's going to adversely affect historic properties, it's our job to say so. You know, and you should submit your project as if it's definitely going to happen, is the other thing too. Because, you know, I realize a lot of this is, since it is a competitive award process, you're not always sure if you're going to get money or how much money you're going to get. But, you know, when you submit it to us, you know, just act as if it is definitely going to happen. Right, so when assessing adverse effects, you know, any of these things you see on your screen could introduce an adverse effect. And like, you know, one of the things, like, it comes in a lot of different shapes and sizes, but like one thing that is pretty common to all of them is that they're not consistent with the Secretary of the Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties, which is basically just it's a set of regulatory standards and advisory guidelines that are kind of like a best practices of historic preservation. And we'll tell you in the adverse effect letter, like exactly what about the project is not consistent with those standards. So you'll know where the adverse effect is stemming from. But, you know, obviously demolition's like a really, you know, pretty obvious one, but it can also be things like, you know, if you want to put up a giant 5/1 or several 5/1 apartment buildings in an otherwise single-story residential neighborhood, you know, you're introducing incompatible visual elements. That could be an adverse effect as well. You know, you'd also be changing the setting. And, you know, same thing with like rehabilitating historic houses, and, you know, you want to tear out all the wood materials and replace them with vinyl. You know, you're diminishing the historic materials and workmanship, so that's where the adverse effect is going to come from. All right, so what do you do when that happens? So the first step is to explore options to avoid this adverse effect. And then if it can't be avoided, you try to find ways to minimize it. If you can't find ways to minimize it, then we go to mitigation. But these first two have to be done. That is just kind of how the process works. And we'll work with you to you know, make sure that happens. Okay, so what does this look like? Avoiding an adverse effect could be, you know, moving it to an alternative site or using some kind of alternative compatible design. Like I said, when it comes to historic properties, we generally prefer that you repair instead of replace, or you could just get ahead of the whole thing and look at the, you know, the Secretary of the Interior standards and incorporate that into your project planning. So, you know, and then minimizing would be altering to minimize but not eliminate the adverse effect. So an example of this would be like, you know, maybe you take a couple floors off of your giant 5/1 apartment building. So it's only like 2 or 3 stories. Well, you've reduced it, but maybe you haven't entirely eliminated the adverse effect. Or you introduce, you know, some kind of landscaping or vegetative buffer to help reduce its its visual impact. That'll help. And all this stuff has to be like data driven. So like when you send this in, usually what this looks like is it'll be like, you know, DCA requirements require so much density, which means we have to build a single building and it has to be a big building. And the cost of rehabilitating the existing property is just way too high. You know, things like that, but there has to be like actual data and numbers associated with that. And so mitigation is basically so when the adverse effect is unavoidable, and basically what we're trying to do is we're trying to come up with something that is commensurate with the loss of the historic property. And this can be a lot of different things. You know, you could make some kind of popular report for publication. You could do some kind of on-site exhibit, you know, photographic recordation of a resource that's being destroyed. You know, you could survey or update an existing survey, but of course we always encourage creativity. So, you know, if you got any good ideas like an oral history project or something like that, we appreciate that. You also have to notify the ACHP. They have an online form to do this, and it's the information that you'll include is pretty similar to the stuff that you include in the ER form, but there's some other things. You know, you'll include our adverse effect letter, and I think they have a few other specific questions they're looking for. I apologize for the background noise there. And most of the time, the ACHP doesn't participate in the drafting of MOAs, at least not from what I've seen. And they have a couple different contacts depending on what, program your project falls under. So that's generally these two folks here you see on the screen, and that's their contact information. So once you have your mitigation strategy established, we formalize that through the creation of a memorandum of agreement, or MOA. It's basically just a legally binding document that kind of lays out what we're going to do to address the adverse effect. It includes a preamble that has all those like whereas clauses that basically paint the picture of how we got here in the first place. Then your first set of stipulations is the mitigation strategy, and it kind of just lays out like who's responsible for what the review process is going to look, what's going to happen after it's finished, things like that. And then we just have some administrative stipulations, dispute resolution, should there be one, reporting, monitoring, duration, if there needs to be amendments or anything like that. And this is mostly template language. It's pretty overwhelming the first time you look at it, I think, but once you understand that it's mostly just template language that you fill in, it's really not so bad. And then eventually, once it gets signed by once we reach a document that everybody's happy with, we sign it. And then, once the MOA is executed, your project can continue. So just to recap again, make sure you keep the cold reader in mind and provide as much information as possible. An adverse effect is not, it's not the end of the world. It's not a value judgment of your project. It also doesn't stop your project. And we're here to help you, guide you through that process, this entire process. So, if you ever have any questions, feel free to reach out. And that's basically pretty much all I got for you. So here's my contact information if you need it. And I'm sorry, I realize I went a little over time here. But if anybody's got any questions, we can go ahead and do that now.
Thank you, Santi. Yes, there are a few questions for you. The first is, since HPD is no longer under DNR, does that mean the existing programmatic agreement is no longer valid? If it is not, is it possible for there to be a new programmatic agreement since both are under the same parent agency?
As far as I'm aware, that move did not affect any of our existing agreements, because I do believe that question came up before the move. We're still operating as if all of our PAs are still in place. So to the best of my knowledge, that hasn't affected any existing PAs.
Okay. And the next question is, is there any possibility for certain projects to be considered exempt from HPD review if there is no above ground physical construction such as pipe bursting or sewer rehab?
That's a good question. I'm wanting to say no. And the reason for that is because, like I said, the triggering mechanism is federal agency involvement for the Section 106 review process. So if, HUD's giving you money, it's probably going to have to undergo Section 106 review. The only possible exemption to that I could think of is if HUD didn't consider it an undertaking. But if it involves like any kind of construction or anything like that, I'm pretty sure they're going to consider it an undertaking, and therefore we'll have to go through this review process.
Okay. HPD submittals temporarily being accepted by email, or can they now be sent by regular mail?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I couldn't make that out.
Sure. Are HPD submittals temporarily being accepted by email, or do they now need to be sent by regular mail?
So for the time being, while the pandemic is on, we are accepting things by email. Okay, so we're accepting things by email for the time being while the pandemic is on. I don't, that might change in the future once we, you know, kind of come back to some semblance of normal. I think as of late, email submissions have actually been more reliable. And the reason why is because if you email something directly to me, I will send you a confirmation that says, yes, I got it, and it's been entered into, you know, the tracking system for review. And, you know, regular mail's still been a little dicey. Some things are still going to our old office, and, you know, somebody has to drive over there and pick up all the mail and then bring it back to the new office. So, but yeah, the short answer is we are accepting things for email for the time being. I don't know if that's going to be permanent, but for the, you know, for now, that's totally fine and probably actually preferable. Anything else?
Sorry, I was on mute. That's the new catchphrase for 2020, 2021. The last question that we have in the chat bar right now is, do new market tax credit projects require SHPO review?
I'm sorry, this is what kind of tax credits?
New market tax credits? That's that DCA administers, but just in general, the question the asker is asking if it requires SHPO review.
Maybe JIPA. I'm really not sure, to be honest, because if that's a DCA only, I think it would just depend on if DCA wants it reviewed under the Georgia Environmental Policy Act. If it's not a federal fund, then it wouldn't need to undergo Section 106 review. I can
No,
say
it is a federal. It is a federal program.
Okay. Then I probably, yes. It gets a little dicey because I don't always know when I receive projects, like what the exact funding mechanism is. So knowledge of specific programs like that can get a little dicey for me. But, you know, I would say if there's any doubt, then send it in. Worst come to worst, you know, we can just say, okay, we don't need to review this after all. And it's probably safer to, you know, get something reviewed that doesn't need to be reviewed than go the other way around.
Understood. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much for participating today. Now we're going to open it up for verbal questions. I will unmute everyone and take you off of listen only mode. I only ask that you raise your hand before asking your question so that you may be called on for a response by our panelists. Okay. The first question, first person that we'll hear from today is Deborah Allen.
Hi, Kim. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Our question goes back to the planning presentation by John. And I think he said that we did not, if we needed to amend the community work program, if a community did, that they could just amend it to put their project in, and it didn't have to get approval by the other communities that are part of the plan, and it did not have to go to DCA. It would just be submitted as a courtesy. So there's like no review process of that. Did we hear that correctly?
You have to unmute your computer because it won't work online. Unmute your computer so you can get the sound on your computer.
Oh. Turn it on because so we just brought.
John and Julie, are you there to answer the question?
I'm here. I just sent John a message to see if he was still here, but basically, if you're adding a single project to your work program, then yes. We don't go through the formal review process. We just ask that you send the updated plan with that project included to us so we have it in our records.
Thank you.
No problem.
Wouldn't you still need to have the public hearing? Saying the plan is going to be amended?
I will double check on that. I don't want to speak out of turn.
Thank you.
No problem. Oh, John just chimed in and said yes in the chat. He can't unmute himself, it seems.
Okay, so yes to the public hearing.
Yes.
Okay.
All right. Do we have anyone else that would like to ask a question? You can unmute yourself and ask the question. I don't currently have any hands raised.
Kim,
Yes,
this is Deborah again.
yes.
We have a question about service delivery and the Boys and Girls Club question. So we have one right now that's amending their service delivery to show that it's a facility that the community is, that's the service they're providing is a facility. They don't have, they're not connected any other way except to provide a building. So that's how they're amending their service delivery. Is that going to be okay?
If that's what the community decides for them, then that's fine. As long as it's clear that a service they are providing is this facility, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. Thank you, Julie.
All right. Are there any other questions? Come on, guys. You've been on all day. Now, do you have any questions? All right. Well, I know we are past our appointed time, but we will reconvene tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. for day 2 of our applicants workshop, which will focus on application developments. Tomorrow we will hear from members of our team. They will go over application development for all of the different components, all the different project types, including public facilities, neighborhood revitalization. We'll discuss the revitalization area strategies program, our economic development programs, have a demonstration of how to use the DCA mapping tool, which is beneficial in mapping the DCA areas of concentration. And then to wrap up at the end of the day, we will also have a demonstration of the application, online application portal. And so if there are no further questions, we will adjourn for today. And I appreciate your time and attention. Thank you so much. Have a great day.